Assalamualaikum and greeting everyone. Let me start with a simple observation. Over the years, I have supervised many postgraduate students, and interestingly, most of them struggle not at the data analysis stage, but much earlier, at the stage of defining their research problem. Some students come with very interesting topics, but when I ask them, what exactly is the problem you are trying to solve? They pause. So today, this session is designed to help you avoid that situation. We are going to unpack how a strong research study begins, from identifying a meaningful problem to developing a clear purpose statement. If you get these two right, your research journey becomes much smoother. Before we go deeper, let me walk you through how this session is instructed. We will start with the introduction, how to set the stage of your study. Then we move on into the background, where you demonstrate your understanding of the field. After that, we will focus on the research problem. This is the core. Then we will discuss how to construct a strong problem statement using a logical flow. Finally, we will move into the purpose statement, which defines what your study is trying to achieve. I want you to see this not as a separate component, but as a continuous story from general idea to specific research direction. Let me start with a simple question. What makes you continue reading a research paper? Usually, it is the introduction. A good introduction is not just a description. It is a structured entry into your study. In fact, every strong introduction should include three key elements. First, an opening hook. This could be a statistic, a real issue, or a current trend. Second, the research context. This is where you briefly explain the topic and why it is matter, especially in your field such as TVET. And third, the research gap. This is the most critical part, where you show how it is still missing in existing studies. So when you write your introduction, always ask yourself, have I captured attention, provided context, and clearly highlighted a gap? To frame a research gap properly, you need a clear structure. First, you state what is already known, supported by previous studies. Second, you identify what is missing. This is where you highlight the limitation or gap. And third, you justify why this gap is important. This is critical because it shows the relevance of your study. For example, if previous studies show that blended learning improves engagement, but none examine cost effectiveness in rural areas, then that missing aspect becomes your gap. And the justification is, without this knowledge, policymakers cannot make informed decisions. Now, let's focus on the research gap. A research gap is defined as something unexplored, under-examined, or unresolved in the literature. But more importantly, it must be meaningful. For example, we may already know that online learning platforms are widely used. That is what we know. But what we don't know is how effective certain strategies like gamification are improving motivation, especially in specific contexts like secondary schools or TVET. So the research gap is not just about absence, It is about identifying something important that has not yet been addressed. Moving into the background of the study, here you go deeper into the research problem. The background is not just a description. It includes several key components. You begin with the historical or contextual overview, how the issue has developed over time. Then you introduce relevant theoretical framework, and this will anchor your study academically. Next, you provide a concise literature review, highlighting key findings and also gaps. And finally, you justify the study and define its scope and limitation. So the background is where you demonstrate both your understanding and your positioning within existing research. This is where many students get confused. They write the introduction and background in the same way, general and repetitive. Let me simplify this clearly. The introduction is like a summary. It is broad and engaging. The background is like an explanation. It is detailed and analytical. If your background is weak, your research will appear superficial. So, always ask yourself, am I just describing, or am I actually analyzing? Now we come to the research problem. A research problem is defined as an issue in literature, theory, or practice that creates the needs for the study. In simple terms, it answers two questions. What is the problem? And why does it require investigation? The problem becomes clear when you ask yourself, what is the need for this study? So always move from a general topic to a specific issue. For example, student engagement is too broad, but low engagement in online TVET learning environments, that is a research problem. A strong research problem has several important characteristics. First, it clearly states what the study is about. Second, it explains why the study is important and timely. Third, it shows how the study contributes to knowledge and practice. And finally, it connects the study to existing literature. So your problem is not just a statement, it is structured argument. Let me share a practice issue. Some students propose very ambitious topics, but when we ask about data, access, or time, they cannot proceed. So before finalizing your research problem, ask yourself, do I have access to participants? Do I have the time and resources? Do I have the skills? A good researcher is not only creative, but also realistic. Now, beyond feasibility, we ask a deeper question. Should this study be conducted? A strong research problem should fill a gap, replicate and extend previous work, or provide practical value. For example, in TVET, research that informs policy or improves teaching practice is highly valuable. So always think, who benefits from my study? When writing a problem statement, we use what is called the funnel approach. We begin with the general background of the issue. Then we justify the importance of the problem using literature. Next, we identify what is known and what is not known. That is your research gap. Then we highlight the deficiencies in existing knowledge. And finally, we conclude with the specific research problem and the need for the study. So the funnel ensures that your problem statement is logical and progressively focused. A strong problem statement must have a clear line of logic. This means your idea should flow naturally from general context to specific problem. You should also provide background to the variables or concepts being studied and support your argument with selected literature. Not too much, but enough to justify your claim. Most importantly, your problem statement must end with the clear need to know. This is what leads directly to your purpose statement. This is what we call the line of logic. It is your reasoning, your argument, and importantly, it cannot be copied from literature. This is where your critical thinking as a researcher becomes visible. If I can summarize everything into one idea, it is this. A research problem is the gap between what we know and what we want to know. Whenever you feel stuck, come back to this sentence. It will guide you. And this is the selected topics and first sentence of research studies reported in educational journals that you can use for an example. One important principle, your research problem must be supported by literature. You cannot simply claim something is a problem. You must show evidence. This can happen in three situations. There is a little research. Research exists but is limited. Or findings are contradictory. So literature gives credibility to your problem. The need for the study explains why your research should be conducted. It answers questions like, what will this study contribute? Who will benefit from it? So this is where you connect your research to real-world impact. Always begin with a strong hook, a statistic, a question, or real-world issues, because first impression matters, even in research writing. Once the problem is clearly established, the next logical question is, what exactly are you going to investigate? This leads us to the purpose statement. Now, we move to purpose statement. The purpose statement clearly defines the intent of your study. It answers only one key question. What exactly are you trying to find out? According to Creswell, this is the most important statement in your study. To make it clear, you must specify the variables or concept being studied and the type of the study, whether descriptive, relational, or comparative. There are several types of purpose statement. A descriptive purpose focuses on describing a phenomenon or population. A relational purpose examines the relationship between variables, for example, student engagement and performance. A comparative purpose investigates differences between groups, for example, online versus face-to-face learning. Each type reflects a different research objective. So choosing the correct one is essential. A descriptive study answers what is happening. It focuses on describing characteristic or trend. So, for example, the purpose of this study is to describe the technology pattern among high school teachers in urban schools. Notice how the example specifies context, participant, and outcome. This level of clarity is what you should aim for. So in this slide, I provide you with some examples of purpose statement that you can refer and use it as a guideline for your writing. A relational study examines how variables are connected. For example, does student engagement influence academic performance? So the purpose of this study is to explore the relationship between student engagement and academic achievement in middle schools in mathematics. So this is some more examples for the purpose statement in a different study that you can refer. And the third one is the comparative study or the comparative differences purpose statement. A comparative study examines difference between groups. For example, comparing online and face-to-face learning outcome. And the purpose of this study, for example, is shown in this slide. The purpose of the study is to examine the effect of flipped classroom instruction versus traditional text on student score. More advanced study combined. So this also some more examples that you can reflect or that you can maybe use as a guideline for writing your purpose statement. Again, this is another example that I also provide in this slide for you to refer. And to summarize this chapter, your research must begin with a clearly defined problem, supported by literature, structured logically, and leading to a well-defined purpose. These elements form the foundation of a strong study. That's all for the topic for this session. So please, if you have any question related to the topics, you can reach me through email or you can WhatsApp me for further details related to your specific study. That's all for now. Thank you.